Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show where we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a new batch of Warhammer 40k spoilers, and we're talking about Necrons today. So buckle up and let's get started. Starting off, we have Trazyn the Infinite. For 4 colors, 2 black, legendary artifact creature Necron, 4/6 with Death Touch and Prismatic Gallery. As long as it is on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all artifact cards in your graveyard. This is kind of interesting. It's kind of like Necrotic Ooze, but instead of caring about creatures, it cares about artifacts, and it is only your graveyard. That being said, if you build a deck that kind of has a lot of artifact synergies in it, it's pretty easy to go infinite with this. If you have an artifact that taps for mana in your graveyard, and you have an artifact that untaps itself or untaps a creature for a mana cost, and it's less than what you're tapping this for to add mana, then that's infinite immediately. So it seems quite easy to break this, and I look forward to seeing what people come up with, or rather not, because it's probably going to be really annoying. Next up is Out of the Tombs. It is an enchantment for 2 colorless, 1 black, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Eon counters on Out of the Tombs, then mill cards equal to the number of Eon counters on it. If you would draw a card while your library has no card in it, instead return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you can't, you lose the game. So basically it's just a self-mill card. It's a card that's there to fill up your graveyard and not much else. The second line of text should basically never come up. It takes like, what, 8 or 10 turns for this to actually be online, the second part, and then you're just dead to any exile graveyard effect, so that seems kinda iffy. Or if they remove this and then you have no cards in your library, you also lose. This is kinda iffy. It's just a mill card for black, and that's fine. Next up we have Transference. For 2 colors, 2 black, it's an enchantment. Creatures you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. And whenever you cast an artifact spell, you lose 1 life and create a 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. This is really sweet in stats decks that run a lot of artifacts. It's also really cool as a combo enabler. It'll probably allow for some broken stuff because you're going to turn everything into artifacts, which means all your effects that untap artifacts like Unwinding Clock are really sweet. I think it's going to allow for some interesting and broken stuff. It's a Johnny card, and I love these kind of clunky Johnny cards. But the second clause on this makes it not even that clunky, because if your deck is mostly creatures, you're going to be getting a creature every time you cast a spell. That's pretty solid. I like this card. Next up is Illuminer Xeras. For 2 colorless and 1 black, legendary artifact creature Necron. It's a 3/3. It has Secrets of the Soul. Sacrifice another creature at an amount of black equal to the sacrificed creature's mana value. So it's basically sacrifice the card on a creature. This could be really solid in certain decks that want to be sacrificing big creatures like Henzi Toolbox Torre. Adding a bunch of mana when you sacrifice something is pretty nice. The fact that it's only black is a little bit awkward because you're going to need other untapped lands to cast a lot of your things. Still, this has a lot of potential for some explosive turns. Next up we have Anakin the Traveler. Sorry, not Anakin. Next up we have Necron the Traveler. It's 4 colorless and 1 black. It's a legendary artifact creature Necron, a 4/4, Lord of the Necron Legion. Whenever Necron the Traveler attacks, you may cast an artifact spell from your hand or graveyard by paying life equal to its mana value rather than playing its mana cost. So the main thing that came to mind when I saw this card was Darksteel Forge. Just attack with this, pay 9 life, and suddenly they can't kill it and they can't kill anything else on your board. That's an artifact. That is really sweet. There's obviously a bunch of really busted artifacts that you can drop for life. I love this card. I think it's going to see play in a bunch of decks, and even if you're just doing fair stuff with it, getting a free spell out of it that's only costing you a bit of life is pretty nice. Their number is Legion, is X colorless and 4 black. It's a sorcery. Create X tap 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature tokens, then you gain life equal to the number of artifacts you control. Exile their number is Legion, and you may cast their number is Legion from your graveyard. I've seen people mistakenly saying that this is like flashback that you can keep reusing, but obviously it isn't because it exiles when you use it. That second clause is only there because the Necron deck involves quite a bit of milling, and then you can just play this from your graveyard. Still, this is quite a solid card. It can gain you a ton of life in an artifact deck. All your treasure tokens and all of that stuff is going to gain you 1 life, so it can be a solid way to gain a bunch of life and put yourself back in the game whilst making quite a few creatures. They enter tap. It's a little bit awkward, but still being able to cast this from your graveyard if you mill it or discard it is pretty nice. I quite like this card. Next up is Connectex Scarab Swarm. For 4 colorless, an artifact creature insect. It has flying and feeder mandibles. When it enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. For each artifact or land exiled this way, create a 1/1 colorless insect artifact creature token with flying It's a 1/1 flyer. This seems pretty strong. Graveyard Hate is always good in Commander, and getting a bunch of flying 1/1s to go with your Graveyard Hate is even better. I also really like how WotC is moving more towards printing incidental Graveyard Hate on cards that are already decent, because that makes them more likely to be played. Next up is Chronomancer. For 1 colorless and 1 black, an artifact creature, Necron Wizard with flying, atomic transmutation, 1 tap. Sacrifice another artifact, draw a card, and it has Unearth, 2 and a black, and it's a 1/1. So being able to sacrifice artifacts in black isn't that common. I kind of like that they're printing more cards with this effect, because they go straight into my Braid's Arisen Nightmare deck. They're really good there. And it's just nice to have this in colors that aren't red. Drawing a card is nothing to be sneezed at, even though you can only do it once per turn. That is still pretty nice. Convergence of Dominion is 3 colorless, an artifact, Dynastic Command Node. As long as you control your commander, activated abilities of cards in your graveyard cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that ability's activation cost to less than 1 mana. And Translocation Protocols, 3 colorless, and tap, mill 3 cards. I'm not exactly sure what this is broken in, but it's going to be broken in something for sure. It's going to be part of some infinite combo. I'll leave it to you guys to figure out what that is, because my brain hurts with all these spoilers. Next up is Crypto Thrall. For 4 colorless, it's an artifact creature construct. It's a 3/3 with Protector. Other artifact creatures you control have hexproof. I know a lot of Crypto Thralls in the real world, am I right? Seriously though, this is going to be solid if you're running an artifact creature deck. It's colorless, so it can go in a bunch of them, like in Loshin, and it's just nice to have an added layer of protection for your artifacts. Next up is Ghost Ark. Wait, I didn't know the Necrons were Game of Thrones fans. It's 4 colorless for an artifact vehicle, 3/3 with flying, repair barge. Whenever Ghost Ark becomes crewed, each artifact creature card in your graveyard gains Unearth 3 until end of turn and crew 2. So this is really good with artifact creatures that have enter the battlefield abilities or attack triggers such as Mere Battlesphere. You're going to get a bunch of tokens with it. It's just nice to have that kind of recursion on every creature card in your graveyard, and the cost isn't even that expensive. And because it happens before combat, you can still attack with the creatures you reanimate, so that's pretty nice too. If you combo this with the card we talked about earlier that makes all your creatures into artifacts, you can suddenly be reanimating anything in your graveyard. So this seems like it might actually be good again in a Henzi deck or in some deck that's dropping really big fatties into the graveyard. This has a lot of potential actually. Next up is Tomb Fortress. It's a land. It comes into play tapped, and it has tap to add 1 black and 2 black, tap. Exile Tomb Fortress, mill 4 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Hear me out, this seems really slow and really clunky, but this is a decent reanimate spell on a land that also mills you to fill your graveyard and find good targets. This is much better than what we usually get. It exiles itself, which is unfortunate because you can't do it again, but still, I think this could go in a lot of black decks, honestly. It's kind of solid. Next up we have Necron Monolith. For 7 colorless, it's an artifact vehicle 7/7 with flying and indestructible, and it has Eternity Gate. When it enters, when Necron Monolith attacks, mill 3 cards. For each creature card milled this way, create a 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token. Setting aside the fact that it's super cool as a 7/7 indestructible flying vehicle, the fact that it can make up to 3 2/2s on attack is not to be discarded. Now on average, you're not going to hit all 3, so you're probably going to get 1 or 2 2/2s. That's still pretty decent on what is already a huge beater. Next up we have Necron Overlord. For 2 colorless and 2 black, it's an artifact creature, Necron Noble, 2/5 with Relentless March X. Tap X untapped artifacts you control, and target opponent loses X life. This is a really good finisher in a deck that includes tokens and can make quite a lot of mana. Luckily, most mono black decks can make an absolute ton of mana, so this should be able to finish games quite handily if you have a bunch of treasures lying around. You can deal a bunch of damage once per turn, and you can kind of close games off very quickly if they don't deal with this. Next up is Their Name is Death. For 3 colorless and 3 black, destroy all non-artifact creatures. We've seen this effect in other colors, but we've never seen it in black before, so again, nice to have a color shifted version in black. Resurrection Orb. For 2 colors is an artifact equipment. Equipped creature has lifelink, and whenever a equipped creature dies, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step and equip 4. The fact that it does it at the beginning of the next end step is to prevent shenanigans and prevent it going infinite. That's fine. I see this more as a good card in Voltron decks because it gives lifelink, which is something the Voltron commanders want anyway, and it's a nice little bit of protection for your commander. If it dies, it's going to come back. You're not going to need to pay the commander tax, so that's always nice to have. The War in Heaven is a saga for 3 colors and 3 black. Chapter 1 says you draw 3 cards and you lose 3 life. Chapter 2 says mill 3 cards, and Chapter 3 is choose up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 8 or less in your graveyard. Return each of them to the battlefield with a Necrodermis counter on it. They're artifacts in addition to their other types. So again, you can do stuff with the fact that they become artifacts, that's shenanigans. The first chapter is pretty solid, even if it gets killed before the other 2 chapters happen. You've still drawn 3 cards out of it. That's not awful for 6 mana. It's not great, but it's not awful. Milling 3 cards is the worst mode. It's a bit meh unless you're playing a very reanimator heavy strategy. But the third mode is again quite good. You can get up to 3 creatures with total mana value 8 or less. That's actually very good. Usually when we have reanimation spells like this, they only reanimate 1 thing. Here you've got a flexibility of choosing 3 small things if you want. I think that's quite solid. Chronomancer. For 5 colorless and 2 black, it's a 5/1 artifact creature, Necron Wizard. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards, then return any number of artifact creature cards with total mana value 6 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is a little bit less good than the one we just talked about because it's only artifact creatures. This is also very different from Ruthless Technomancer from Kamigawa, despite the very similar name. Should be fine in Necron decks, but probably not anywhere else. Although that being said, if you have it in an artifact creature deck and have ways to blink it, this is repeatable, which is really disgusting. Next up we have Scepter of Eternal Glory. For 4 colorless, it's a legendary artifact. Tap to add 1 mana of any color, and tap to add 3 mana of any 1 color. Activate only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. So this is a Thran Dynamo that taps for colored mana if you play it in a monocolored deck. That seems like it has potential, and the failsafe is it still taps for 1 regular mana, so it's never going to be completely dead if you don't have the 3 lands in play. I think this can actually see quite a bit of play. And finally, Shard of the Void Dragon. For 4 colorless and 3 black, it's a creature, Catan, 7/7 flying, Spear of the Void Dragon. Whenever it attacks, each opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent. And whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield or is put into exile from the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on Shard of the Void Dragon. So it's going to get bigger and bigger. It's a bit win more because it's super expensive, but sacrificing permanents from your opponents when it attacks is actually kind of good. I think this could see a little bit of play in reanimated strategies if you're looking for an extra reanimation target, but it is a little bit slow even in those kind of decks. So there you have it. That has been our review of the first big batch of Necron spoilers. What do you think? Are there any cards that you're excited about in this batch? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all the comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it really helps the channel since we're currently growing. And until next time, take care.